Hello and welcome to Module 1 on Recovery Capital and Measurement. In this section, there will be 3 videos, and those 3 videos will all combine to provide you with some support materials to help you understand the concept of recovery capital and how we started the process of translating that into a measurement system and a measurement model. The first section is about Rat Park, and the Rat Park section is really around how we start to conceptualize the notion of why and how people respond to addictive behaviors, how it's onset and desistance at the end of the process. We start with a very simple question, which is, are drugs addictive? And some of our evidence for supporting the addictiveness of drugs comes from comparative study. What that basically means is the research is originally done with animals, and we use the evidence from the animal studies to allow us to extrapolate to what human behaviors might involve, and then those things will typically be translated into adult studies. And traditionally, what would happen is that animals would be put in cages and they would be given the option of either water or an addictive substance, typically alcohol or an opiate like heroin. And the rats generally, not exclusively, but generally, would prefer to consume alcohol or opiates rather than the water. And this led researchers and scientists to say there is something intrinsically addictive about the substance, that a rat in a cage generally will keep consuming alcohol or opiates to the point of exhaustion and sometimes to the point of death. However, one scientist, Dr. Bruce Alexander, who was involved in some of these studies, decided that there was an alternative explanation based on his observation of what went on in the rat studies. And his conclusion was basically rats in denuded minimal environments will consume the drugs, not because the drugs are intrinsically addictive, but because they are just bored. Their lives are empty. When Dr. Alexander decided to test his theory, he set up an alternative experiment where the rats, instead of being an empty, barren cage, had alternative things to do. They had alternatives to the drugs and found that the results were fundamentally different. So Dr. Alexander designed something called Rat Park, which is like a rat heaven, where the rats had the opportunity to explore, to do things that rats like to do, to move around, to engage with other rats. It was a playground for rats. And what did he find? Well, generally, the rats were just as happy to do other things as to consume the drugs or alcohol. But in other words, there was nothing intrinsically addictive about the drug. Our mistaken assumptions had come from the fact that we had given the rats such a dull, limited set of options that they then felt that there was nothing else for them to do. It was drugs or nothing. And for Dr. Alexander, and for many scientists since then who've been interested in questions of addiction and recovery, this was a fundamental challenge to the assumptions about the inevitability of addiction. If even rats can be made addicted, but rats can also be encouraged not to be addicted, it's the conditions and the circumstance that matters to a far greater extent than had previously been accepted or agreed. Bruce Alexander has written extensively on this subject, and I would strongly recommend anyone who's interested in this to read his book, The Globalization of Addiction, where he basically argues addiction is much, much more likely where people live in worlds lacking in hope, in possibility, in opportunity, and that the globalization of addiction is not about the addictiveness of the substance, but is about the alienation, the sense of anomie that people will experience when their lives are denuded from meaning and purpose. And for Bruce Alexander, the solution is therefore not to find pharmacological cures for drugs, but to change the circumstances. And one of the important things about Dr. Alexander's work was, even when rats had been made addicted to alcohol or opiates, it was still possible with the right circumstances to wean them off. So Rat Park, with its world of opportunity and possibility, could be a resolution. And for Bruce Alexander, This was critical to his model and to his thinking of how we make sense of both substances, but also the process of recovery. And Bruce Alexander will be cited by many recovery theorists as a prototypical recovery person. In essence, what he has done is switch from the focus on the individual to the focus on the context and the group, from deficit-based models of addiction to something that's much more of a strength-based model. And these will be themes that pervade throughout the course of our work on recovery capital. It's important because not only did the Rat Park experiments challenge the inevitability of addiction, it also does something crucially important about why people become addicts. Why people become addicts is contextually bound, but it's also not irreversible. And one of the things that I think is crucial about Bruce Alexander's work is the notion that with the right circumstances, biological factors can be overcome. Our traditional assumption of biopsychosocial, pretty much in that order of importance and prominence, is challenged by Bruce Alexander's model, which effectively says the social and the structural are critical. When we come to discuss this in recovery capital theory, what we will argue is exactly the same. How do you change the person, the individual? You do it through changing and challenging the social and structural factors that create the conditions, one, for addiction, and two, crucially, for recovery. That even where somebody has a strong biological predisposition and risk, has engaged in all kinds of harmful substance-related behaviors, it doesn't mean irreversibility. And here starts the process of hope that's crucial to recovery models. Now, sadly, science is never as straightforward. And one of the things that it is important to point out is Bruce Alexander's work is seminal and crucial and important, but there have been problems with scientists who subsequently attempted to replicate the findings. What we mean by that is other people have attempted to do the same experiment with Rat Park. The results have never been quite as convincing. And one of the problems appears to be that when people were given the opiates, particularly in the original Rat Park, when rats were given the opiates in the original Rat Park experiment, they were frequently very bitter in taste. And there is a theory that some of the aversion in the Rat Park conditions was about the taste of the opiates. However, the key finding for us is that this is a challenge to a biological model that is crucial to bear in mind as we move forward with our ideas, not only of why people become addicted, which links to the world of adverse childhood experiences and the growing literature on this, but also on how we manage and support recovery pathways and recovery models.